So this video is basically going to run over the SQL I did in a previous video and combine it with web server scripting so we can actually fetch data through from the database and we can start making a website that runs off a database backend, hopefully. So, we've got our DB tests from before that I did in a previous video, which is just a connection to the database. Obviously, you need a connection to the database, otherwise you can't fetch anything through. So we've fetched everything through from the database. Now we can start asking it a question. So to ask it a question, we need to use SQL, which is what you've used already. So what I'm going to do, which I know one of two of you have already gone over PHP and SQL before, but I'm going to do something called prepared statements. Now, some of you may have used that, some of you may not have. Prepared statements just makes it more safe in terms of when you're putting in data, it will not corrupt it. And you'll see what I mean when we go over this in the next few weeks. So, first off, I'm going to make a new variable called statement, and this is going to be used to dictate what we're going to want the database to do, essentially. We're going to make this equals the connection. So the connection, if you remember, is you logging into the database. So we're going to use this connection and we're going to do something with it. Oops. Arrow. And then the word prepare. So this is going to be a prepared statement. And yes, you do need just normal circular brackets, nothing else. And I'm going to preemptively put a semicolon at the end of the line. The only time you don't need a semicolon at the end of the line is for an if statement, because the if statement will run straight into the thing that's inside the brackets. You always need a semicolon at the end of every line, as long as it's not an if or a while or a for loop or anything like that. It's just that on lines like this, you do need a semicolon at the end, so make sure you put that on the end. Right. Inside the prepare, we now need to prepare an SQL statement. And you do need to have double quotes because it's preparing this statement, so you have to have double quotes and it all has to be inside double quotes, but it should work nonetheless. So select. Now for this example, I'm just going to select everything from the database to show that it all comes through. So select user ID. I'm going to select username, password. Now I'm going to talk to you why that goes blue in a second. Priv level from users. So that's going to select everything from the users table, essentially. Now, the reason password goes blue is because in databases, you can use passwords to log in stuff through SQL. But because it's being used in here, it will just treat it as a parameter. The editor in Visual Studio Code thinks that it's an SQL statement. So really what I'm going to say to you guys is when you come to do your tables properly, you don't have a field that's just called password. If you're going to have a password for a user, call it something like user or table password or something like that. Just change it slightly just so it doesn't cause that problem. Otherwise, I think it's going to get a little bit confusing. But we've got the statement and we've prepared it. So we've got a SQL statement that's going to select everything from users. That's fine. That's not an issue. Right, so the line underneath, statement. And now we have to have arrows. So no more equals after this point. You don't have equals because we've already got the SQL statement we're working with. We're now just going to do things with that statement. That's why we just have an arrow. So first we need to execute it, which means that it will run this statement in the database, so it will run it. And as daft as it sounds, you have to do it step by step, otherwise it will not work properly. So we've ran that. We now need to store the result. Oops, that's the wrong thing. That one. Store underscore result and brackets. And again, the only reason you don't put anything inside these brackets is because that's an actual function that you're sending to the database to do. So you're going to tell it to execute this statement. You're then going to tell it to store the result. But the problem is, where are we going to store the result? Well, you need to tell it that. So the next line, and it's an arrow, and we're going to bind the result. Now in this one, you do need to put variables in. So we're going to bind these results. So $ user ID, $. Now you've got to be careful that they don't match up with these usernames up here. That's why I changed these in the previous video. So I'm going to call this $. I'm going to call it something like user. I'm going to call it something like UTBL username, and as long as you remember that's what it's called, then it's easy. And again, you can just change this to whatever you want. It doesn't have to be that. So I'm going to do the same thing for that UTBL password, so we know it's from the user table, and then we're just going to have priv level. So make sure that this matches up with this up here, so these match up together like that. Because if they don't, then it's not going to go in. So this needs to match with this needs to match with that needs to match with that needs to match with that. Now, potentially speaking, I could, by accident, say, put user ID at the end. Let me just change that to that. So I could do it that way. Now the issue with that is user ID will go inside of table username. These are only names that you give in variables, so it will just put it into the variable that's basically assigned to it. So essentially, user ID will go into user table username. Username will go into the password. The password will go into the priv level, and the priv level will go into the user ID, which obviously is going to mess things up a lot. So make sure that these things match up with what's above it, otherwise this isn't going to work. Right, so we've now executed, we stored the result, and we've binded the result. However, because we're fetching everything through from users, there's going to be more than one user ID, more than one username, etc, etc. There's going to be hopefully 2 records coming through that we need. So, the next thing we need to do, and it sounds daft after we've done all that, is do statement fetch, which actually fetches all this data through from the table. So it's going to run all that, and then it'll fetch it through from the table. Now, when we fetch it, it's not going to put it into these results properly. We have to do something separate in order for it to come through properly, and it will make sense as to why. So we keep the statement fetch. I'm just going to delete the semicolon off the end for now, and there's a good reason. Go to the beginning of it, type in while, and we need 2 sets of brackets, and underneath that we need curly brackets. Now, a while loop, you've probably done this before with Paul, or if you guys were here previously when Doug used to be here, probably with Doug. But while will basically be like, right, while this data is coming through, do what's in here. So what we're going to do is echo out these here, so we can see what they are. So I'm going to do user ID, then dot, then I'm probably going to do a set of quotes just to put a space in, then a dot again, $u, oops, not table password, table username, then dot, then space again, then dot, then $u, tbl password, and dot, then double quote, space, and then priv level. Like that. And then what I'm going to do is another dot, and I'm going to put a double quotes in and a BR, so it puts it on a new line as a break, and then semicolon at the end for that. So what this will do, this while statement, is it will fetch through the first set of data, which should be me, so my name Richard with my password, and print all that out. Then it will go to the next record, which was James, and then print all that out on a separate line. So what we're going to do now is we're going to save this, and we're going to run this and see if it works properly. So let's have a look. So I'm going to go on to my index of test pages, and I'm going to click on DB test, which is there. And as you can see, it's fetched everything through. So it's fetched my name through, and it's fetched James's name through with all the stuff on. So that's exactly what we wanted. That's the end goal, essentially. So this works. We've now got a system where we've got a database and we can start fetching data through from it and print it out on screen. That's brilliant. That's exactly what we want. What you can do, because obviously all this is doing is printing this out, but you might just want one person. Well, how do you do just one person? What I'm going to do, I'm going to end this video here, and on the next video I will show you how to actually fetch just one person through using a parameter.